We're not that far behind.
No, we're not.
And we're live.
We are live. Good morning, Senate Judiciary. It is April 2nd, 2023. Believe it or not, we're into April, which always means that at some point in April, we will shut down running committees. I don't know what that date is. I'm hopeful that we have 3 weeks left, and that it's the 23rd, but I don't know for sure, so hang in there. The first order of business is having Judge Thomas Zone, Chief Superior Judge, talk to us about H27, which is an acting controlling coercive, an act relating to coercive controlling behavior in defense of police.
So good morning.
Come on.
Tom Zone, for the record, Chief Superior Judge. The bill is a policy determination by the legislature as to expansion of the current relief from abuse protections. It adds a category, and this category would be for coercive controlling behavior as is set forth in the bill. The bill continues with the determination of those who are able to seek relief under Title 15 for a relief from abuse order as being family or household members as that term has been defined. I point this out because this is beyond what is this is beyond intimate partners or dating relationships, but this bill, with this expansion, would allow, for instance, roommates from University of Vermont, adult children, to file actions based upon this, and it would allow cousins, other relatives, people who have lived together for any period of time. And that is a policy decision. But the impact of that policy decision is one that the courts would see, we believe, an increase in cases if you have that broad an approach. Well, the House did address this in one way, and they removed it from parents and minor children. But that didn't change the fact that adult children and adult parents could still file against each other. The change here, where it says coercive controlling behavior on page 2 in lines 4 through 7, where it talks about conduct between a child under 18, the child's parent or guardian involved in the exercise of the parent's constitutional right. That, I think it's fair to say, will not be a bar to the filing, but would rather, in some cases, be a determination at the hearing. In other words, it would be, well, is this within a parent's constitutional right to the care, custody, and control of the parent's child? And so, again, I point this out because it's a policy if the legislature wants to have coercive controlling behavior apply outside of intimate partners, domestic partners. But that policy of leaving it apply, even with the prohibition for children, is one that we do think will have an impact on the courts for more cases. That impact, we think, also will bring with it a complexity that is not there when you have these types of cases, whether it is for intimate partners or the broader family or household members. The issue of a relief from abuse order being taken up, it's a summary proceeding. Their emergency orders are issued, and then we have a summary proceeding in court, the regular rules of evidence, things like that. Our goal is to address the need for the harm to be remediated and to provide protection. And when you add this type of policy and this type of basis for a finding of abuse, we do think that there will be an increase in the cases. We see these types of claims oftentimes in domestic cases, sometimes going both ways, the two partners going against each other with allegations. We also think that there may be the necessity for expert testimony at times. And so I point this out because it is a policy that brings with it the potential for extending the time of hearings and requiring more hearing time. Now, if there's a need for protection, the court's going to do what it needs to do and hold the hearings that it needs to hold to provide protection that the legislature has established. But I do point that out because we do think it would have an increase. It may even, as I point out, it may even require expert witnesses, while judges would be trained and have training in domestic violence matters, including coercive controlling behavior. One of the things that judges can't do is serve as the expert witness. We can't say, well, I learned this in a training, therefore I'm going to make findings based upon it. It can inform our decision making, it can help us, but we still have to have witnesses to tell us what the evidence means to them so the court can make the findings. I heard the committee's discussions last week about the intent section and the examples. The examples had originally been in the body of the statute, and they were moved to an intent because my understanding is that when you look at the statute, if you put the examples into the body of it, I heard the committee discussing the fact that many of you might have different views of what something means. In other words, does this really fit to this category? What does this prohibit? What does that prohibit? And when you start having questions like that, that can sometimes lead to challenges that are made that a statute is vague, or a statute is overbroad, or infringes upon someone's First Amendment rights. And so those are the types of challenges that when you put that type of language in the body of the statute, that could potentially be increased. And so having them in another area, an intent, I think is a step towards trying to minimize the potential for that. It's a policy decision. My understanding is that in the House, and I went back and listened to the testimony in the House, I recall that some of the members said that one of the reasons for having that intent spelled out was because even though the judges may not need that intent language when they're interpreting the statute, there are certain members who felt that it was important for the public to be aware of what this bill provides protection for. And again, that's a policy decision. When a judge looks at the statute, the judge applies the plain and unambiguous language of the statute. So the judge would apply the statute under Title 15 VSA Section 1101 as defined. We would apply that definition. If there's an ambiguity, the court then goes to the intent and would look to the intent to address the ambiguity. But before that, the court applies the plain and unambiguous language. One of the things I also talked about in the House was that sometimes less is more. And by that, sometimes by adding on examples, it adds in potential areas of disagreement or potential areas of challenges that might not otherwise be there, and that might add vagueness or overbreadth concerns where they may otherwise not have been present. The statute also, I believe it was Senator Baruth who asked a question, and he was looking at, on page 1, lines 20 and 21, coercive controlling behavior means a pattern of conduct that recklessly causes or has the effect of causing a reasonable person. Then it gives examples. He was right. The first clause there talks about recklessly causing. Recklessly is the intent or the actions of the individual who is engaging in the prohibited behaviors. The effect of causing a reasonable person is how the person who is on the receiving end takes that in. And so if the focus is, if you say the effect of causing a reasonable person to have certain behaviors or emotional distress, substantial emotional distress or fear for safety, it doesn't matter what the intent was on the other side. And so as long as you have that, it's always going to override the recklessly, because even if somebody recklessly did it and didn't cause the harm, you wouldn't be able to get the order anyway. And so by having the effect, it doesn't in many ways negate the recklessly.
So, quick question. So is that the effect of causing, is that essentially strict liability, the way, that's what I'm sensing?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is. It's very similar to the existing 12 VSA 5131. our existing civil stalking statute, which is also incorporated into Title 15, the family law, where it talks about stalk means to engage purposely in a course of conduct directed at a specific person that the person engaging in the conduct knows or should have known would cause a reasonable person to. And so it has the knows or should have known. Here, it would essentially be if the person receives it, irrespective of your intent, you're liable.
So was that the stalking statute that
That's
you had
correct.
cited, and it's a knowingly standard?
Knows or should have known. Or should know, yes.
Okay, so
Just a quick question. Page 6,
go ahead first, and I'll ask my question.
B1. Due to the fact I don't know the Constitution by heart.
I don't have a page 6. As passed, I have pages 1 through 5.
Oh,
You're looking probably at the bill as introduced.
I thought I had it as passed. Okay, anyways, page 2,
Here we go.
B1, BI, involving the exercise of a parent's constitutional right to the care, custody. Can somebody show me where that is in the Constitution? I don't.
There's a case called United States v. Troxel. It's also been referenced by the Vermont Supreme Court in a number of cases about the rights of parents to have the ability to make decisions for their children. Troxel and the Vermont cases oftentimes talk about grandparents and grandparents visitation and grandparents being able to go to court to say, we want to see our grandkids, even though the parents say no. But the principle of parents' right to engage in appropriate behaviors is one that is recognized.
So it's not necessarily Michelle or someone in the Constitution, or?
I believe it is, has been referenced as being part of the Constitution, but to the best of my knowledge, and I could be wrong on this, I don't think the Constitution has a specific section that references the word parental rights.
Thank you.
The phrase parental
So
rights.
it does not, and I can send something to you, Bob. I have a little, something that I've sent out to folks before about that particular issue.
Thank you.
Michelle did send out information on other states, and can I read just Connecticut's to you? Coercive control of such family or household member, and we could use the same items here, which is a pattern of behavior that in purpose or effect unreasonably interferes with a person's free will and personal liberty. Is that a better definition?
I won't be so bold as to say better. I would say it's simpler. Maine, for instance, has one that says compelling their definition under this type of bill, compelling a person by force, threat of force, or intimidation to engage in conduct from which the person has a right or privilege to abstain, or to abstain from conduct in which the person has a right to engage. I don't think it's appropriate for me to say this is better or not,
Okay.
but I think
My term would be,
it's simpler.
this is simpler and less vague.
If you're looking at the intent and the examples there, and you're including that in the analysis, the language you just referenced is simpler and more direct language.
So, Michelle, I would ask if you just make an amendment that either uses Connecticut or Maine, and we can start to talk about it.
Okay.
Now, I do know that the bill, as introduced and as the intent section says, is really intending to address the model. And the language from Connecticut and Maine is not necessarily model language, but obviously that's a policy decision.
But I'm concerned with the language being, I agree with you, being vague, and the term recklessly is offset by that causes a reasonable person to fear for plaintiff safety, or what if the person's not reasonable?
A reasonable mind, I think when you look at that, one of the things I often say is reasonable minds can differ. And so I might say, well, I wouldn't do that, but if I look at an individual who's filed for protection, even if I look at it and say, well, I don't know that I would necessarily agree with that, if I believe it's reasonable, and that's really a very subjective.
My biggest, I agree with the intent of this bill, and I agree with what they're trying to do, but my experience with my wife, the last year of her life, there were many times when I don't think she was a reasonable person, but her mind was extremely sharp, but the disease was causing all kinds of issues. And so my behavior towards her may have been seen coercive and controlling, like telling her that she couldn't get up. You cannot get up because every time you get up, you fall. But she didn't realize her first instinct was to do something on the floor. She wanted to get up and pick it off. If there was some, so that's, I don't think she was reasonable at that point, understanding that the danger of falling.
And those would be the types of decisions the court would have to assess.
Right, so the court would have to assess whether or not obviously she wasn't gonna take me to court, but it's an example of coercive behavior on my part to get her to stop getting up. But her instinct was to always get up. And there were so many times where, while I was caring for her, which was about 17 hours a day, where she would want to get up. And I would tell her, no, you can't get up.
But under the bill,
Yell at her.
the court would also have to find that the conduct would make the individual fear for their safety or the safety of a family member, or there's also the provision to suffer substantial emotional distress. And again, those would be the determinations the court would have to make.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that it is too vague and I don't like the term recklessly here.
I did want to just also highlight one thing, and I did mention earlier about, it's going to cause an increase in cases. And we think that could be substantial potentially under the way it is. But I want to be very clear, when I say that, yeah, that's going to be the impact. But if there's a safety issue, and the legislature believes that a policy is necessary in order to effectuate the safety of individuals in the state of Vermont, we will do what we need to do in the judiciary, no matter if it's a minimal impact or a significant impact, to make sure that we provide the appropriate hearings to both parties, to make sure that we are able to address the legislative intent to provide protection where it's warranted under the law. I do know that while there is the perception, well, this can increase cases, I think it's fair to say that, and I've talked to Sarah Robinson about this, that in some jurisdictions where she's spoken with others, that it didn't seem to increase it that much. I don't know whether it's actually going to have that significant an increase, but whether it does or not, the reality is we're going to be there to address the cases according to the law that the legislature sets forth.
It may be a good thing if it increases the cases and prevents actual physical abuse. However, I want to make it as simple as possible and not need the complexities that seem to be in this Senator regime.
Thank you. I wanted to continue the conversation about the substantial emotional distress. So, for example, in stalking, loosely the definition refers to may or may not requiring medical treatment as a result of the distress. So when we put the modifier of substantial in front of this definition, how do you think a court would interpret that?
But you're referring to the criminal definition of stalking. Mm-hmm. That is not the definition under Title 12, Section 5131. So that language you talked about, the medical, is not included in 5131.
No, I sent you a link to the civil orders in 12.
Got it. I think I was looking at the stalking. Okay, yeah, I'll dig that. Thank you.
And Senator Sears, you made me think of one more thing, and I apologize to keep going on about this, but I was asked, I think, in the House, do you think there's going to be an increase? And I think my response was something along the lines of, well, yes, because my understanding is that this policy and this bill is being advanced to address a need that is not being met. Therefore, if this bill is passed and it becomes law, I would assume that we're going to have more cases because then would be ideally meeting the need, filling the gap that is currently in existence that is necessary by the legislature's determination.
Thank you. Senator Wahowski.
So, while I certainly appreciate that there may be an increase and we're meeting a need that is not currently being met, I imagine that some of these cases that would come under this new law would have eventually come under the current statute, meaning that the coercive and threatening behavior would have escalated to physical violence. And so it's not necessarily that every case that is going to come in here would not have eventually seen the courts. Do you think that that is potentially a mitigating factor here?
Well, I don't know what you mean by mitigating so much, but I agree with you.
Okay.
The reality is, if you are able to stop the behavior before it gets to the physical harm, then yes, at the physical harm or other types of behaviors that might have been captured by the existing statute, yes, it would have gotten there at some point. This type of bill, as I understand it, as I look at it, allows intervention earlier to prevent what could be, I'll say, a physical harm at that point. And so, yes, I think it does, it puts us in an earlier position to intervene and provide protection.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That is helpful.
That is helpful. Any other questions for Judge Zonay? Judge, any other comments?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very helpful.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. So the next witness is Dana Desano, Assistant Attorney General, Office of Attorney General.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. My name is Dana Desano, and I'm here on behalf of the Attorney General's office. At the outset, our office wants to thank this committee generally for all of your work in thoughtfully addressing issues that help victims of domestic violence in this state, and for recognizing that not all abuse is physical abuse. The Attorney General's office supports laws that provide additional protections for people experiencing abuse. And because H27 expands the definition of abuse to include coercive, controlling behavior, thereby protecting more abuse victims, we do generally support this bill. I am a prosecutor in the criminal division, and I've spent the better part of 14 years working with victims of domestic and sexual violence. I've been involved in many domestic assault cases involving intimate partners where the victims have said that they wanted to get help before the abuse turned physical, but they felt that there weren't adequate avenues to do that and to get that help. I've heard the frustration that they felt, that they weren't taken seriously by the system until they had bruises or signs of physical abuse. Many of us in this room understand that non-physical abuse, like coercive control, can impose devastating mental anguish and harm on victims, but the studies also show that it predicts future physical violence. The Department of Justice had a study that found that intimate partners who exercise control over their partner's daily activities were more than 5 times more likely to kill them. And when compared with situational intimate partner violence, violence arising in coercively controlling relationships tend to be not only more frequent, but more severe. Senator Wahowski, I believe last week, already brought up the fact that 50 is related, so anything that we can do to intervene and offer protection for victims early is critical. We understand that this is a process, and we've heard the concerns that have been brought up today and last week, and we do look forward to helping kind of refine the language of this to address some of those concerns. And we're happy to, Senator Sears brought up the Connecticut and Maine language, take a closer look at that and offer our exact suggestions on wording that we think may work to address this committee's concerns. But today I'm here generally on behalf of the Attorney General's office to express our support for expanding protections for domestic violence victims and to thank the committee for spending the time on this important work.
Thank you. Any comments on the intent section? Whether it's helpful, harmful, or?
I'm happy to workshop that a bit more internally with our office and get back to you on that.
Before we do actual markup on the bill, and I see I realize that it may be intimate partners, but as a child, one of the most difficult things you have to do is decide when to take away your parents' driver's license. And one of the things is access to a vehicle. And I just can't tell you how difficult that is because it's got all the markings of independence, et cetera. But there comes a point when people shouldn't be driving. And oftentimes the state doesn't know that until you have a bad accident or something happens. So those are types of things, and yet as passed by the House version, and the intent is access to a vehicle. And I know what they're trying to get at, and I don't want to change that, but on the other hand, I don't want cases that are, unintended.
Yeah, and I think that's why having these discussions are helpful
Well,
to
I
bring
think
up
the
this.
language would be much more helpful if it was clearer and not as vague as the House language, in my opinion. Senator.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a specific question, but I did notice that twice during your presentation, you used the term, "We generally support this," and then you used it again. What does that mean exactly? Are there portions of this bill that you don't support? Or?
We do support this bill. We do support expanding the protections. However, we have listened and heard the concerns about vagueness in some of the specific issues. So we recognize that there's more work to be done. And we look forward to being part of addressing those issues and at the table, but we absolutely support expanding protections for victims.
What I personally would appreciate is folks who are going to be involved with the markup, taking a look at Maine and Connecticut and seeing your thoughts about that language, if it fits your goals, whatever.
Absolutely.
We'll come back to markup is it next week, Ben?
Yes, likely.
We're not coming back to this until next week. So sometime next week, you have a week to kind of look at Maine, New Hampshire. And if there's other examples out there that you think are better, I looked at California, and as usual, California seems extremely confusing. I'm always confused when I go to California.
No, we will definitely do that, and we appreciate the opportunity to do so.
I would focus on Maine and Connecticut and see what. So, any other comments, questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Laura Beerley, VRP Project Director for Vermont Legal Aid. Laura, welcome by Zoom.
Thank you for having me. Good morning, everyone. It's Laura Byerly, for the record. And I'm the director of the Victims' Rights Project at Vermont Legal Aid. Just for context, I have 17 years of experience working with survivors of domestic violence, and I have spent at least 3 weeks of every month for the last 8 years in at least one RFA docket day. So I live and work with this statute a lot. And I wanted to take the opportunity today to give you the perspective of someone who does work with this statute and with domestic violence survivors on a regular basis. But sometimes I'm not even aware that I'm working with a survivor of domestic violence because they don't talk about it. And that's not always why they're in my office. It comes up when I ask about their household income and they say, I don't know, but they're the primary wage earner. When I ask them about other supports and they haven't talked to family in over a decade and don't have any friends. When they can only meet me at 11:30 on Wednesday because they can cut a doctor's appointment short and their partner won't know that they're meeting with me. When we're in a 20-minute meeting and they receive 40 text messages asking where they are, and when they have to check in at regular intervals and can only talk to or about certain people. And then when their employer, friend, acquaintance, store, schedule, and day-to-day life all needs to be approved by a partner. A survivor of coercive controlling behavior recently said to me, I figured the only way out of this was that either I would die or he would kill himself. And if he didn't kill me first, then I would be free. Unfortunately, years ago, back at the beginning of my career, I turned the news on in the morning to find out that a client had, in fact, been murdered by her husband, and then their husband killed themselves. I never want anyone in Vermont to experience that again. And this statute takes an important step in expanding those protections, because all too often the first incident of physical violence is the last. When I first learned about adding coercive control to the definition of abuse, I was concerned that this would make the RFA process unworkable and would dilute the powerful remedy we have to protect survivors from physical abuse. So I talked to practitioners in other jurisdictions. It turns out that no one wants to talk about coercive controlling behavior if they don't have to. If there are incidents of physical abuse, that's what people will talk about first. They did not see a huge uptick in cases, but what they did see is that people who really needed the protection finally had a way to get it. Survivors living under controlling and abusive partners are often embarrassed to admit how much the other person controls their behavior. They will say things like, "I can't believe I let it go on that long." They feel that others will judge them for putting up with it. But coercive control is abuse. It is manipulation specifically aimed at removing another person's autonomy. Survivors often feel they have to follow a script written and contained only in the head of their partner, and if they don't follow the unwritten role they have been given perfectly, their life becomes a nightmare. The person they are supposed to be able to trust more than any other has taken all their trust and turned all their vulnerabilities against them for no other purpose than to abuse or to control. Physical abuse heals faster than the mental and emotional abuse many survivors of coercive control endure. We need tools to help those who are being abused break free from the cycle of violence and regain their autonomy, their dignity, and their safety. Thank you. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Are there any questions? Hearing none. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Welcome. All right. Are there any other questions, comments for Michelle on S27, H27, excuse me? With that, I think we will schedule next week an hour to go over H27 and hopefully vote it out. With some amendments. Gives you till next week, Michelle, to Maine and then Connecticut. Or if people want to make suggestions to myself and Michelle about how you'd like to see it, look. So with that, I would switch to H40, which is a bill that has to do with tampering with condoms. It's a bill that we took up last year, end of the session, and then we ran out of time because, so maybe, Michelle, you could just refresh our memory briefly what this bill does. We had written testimony from, in our files from Emma Schwartz, about birth, and Mina Hashimi, Lily Bratton, a number of different individuals who were suffering from this. And then we had the women's advocacy and rise. So if you look back, if you could just go through it again.
Sure.
Like walk us through it so we remember what we were. I think the committee was ready to vote, and then there was some House member that wanted to testify.
Okay. So for the record, Michelle Childs, Office of Legislative Counsel, I'm looking at the House passed version of H40. So the concept behind this is it would be creating in statute a private civil right of action if someone violates the statute. Sometimes y'all have done this over the course of the years where, you know, someone may be able to sue under common law, you know, maybe there's a tort action there, maybe for battery or for intentional infliction of emotional distress or something, but it's not specific and it's not clear. And so what you guys have done at different times is decide to put something in Title 12 that says that if a certain duty is breached and certain conduct occurs, that it's just identifying that someone has a right of action to sue someone if they have breached that, that statute. And so if you look at section 1 is really just in there because I wanted to have the definition of sexual act before the reader to be able to see. So I'm just actually making a technical change to that section. It's not changing the definitions, but certainly we've talked a lot about the definition of sexual act this session. And that term is used in section 2. So it is creating so it's not a crime. It's not creating a crime. It is possible that depending on the circumstances that there could be some violation of an existing statutory crime there, but it would depend on the circumstances. But if you see, so it's creating a new section, non-consensual removal or tampering with a condom. And so on page 2, subsection A, no person shall engage in a sexual act with another person when consent to the act is made with the explicit understanding that a condom would be used. And then a person intentionally and without consent of the other person removes or tampers with the condom prior to or during the sexual act in a manner likely to render it either ineffective, for its common purpose. So basically there's been an agreement, there's consent to engage in the sexual act, and then after that, someone removes the condom, rendering it ineffective, and they've done it without the consent of the other party. So
this goes into civil.
this is civil, yep. It is, I have it in 13, but I think I went back and I'm trying to remember because we did this last year. I think we went back and forth about whether it was put in Title 12 or Title 13. I can move it to Title 12, but
Yeah, I'm thinking this is, if it's civil.
Mm-hmm. It did have originally, it had 2 pieces and the House stripped out the criminal provision and left
Right.
the civil. So I can look and see where I can put it in Title 12 if you want to move it to 12.
Yeah, I think to make it clear it's civil, we
Mhm.
should do that.
Sure. So subsection B addresses the civil aspect. So it's a person harmed by a violation of subsection A may bring an action in civil division for compensatory damages, punitive damages, and reasonable costs and attorney's fees. And then I'm gonna.
So I'm comfortable with it being civil. There must have been a good reason why the House chose to make it civil.
I am curious about that reason, and maybe we learned last year, but I cannot remember.
Yep, Sarah, I've only got, 2 more minutes.
Just want
Yeah,
to
go
say,
ahead.
Sarah Robinson from the Vermont Network, we actually supported, including civil and did not support, a criminal, putting this in the criminal statutes.
Okay.
So happy to speak with the committee about that at some point, but
Yeah, I think we talked about this last year.
we did, yes.
My recollection was there wasn't any opposition to the removal of the
So
criminal.
why don't you come back next week with a redraft? It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes to make clear it's a civil action and not.
Yep. And then I just wanted to let you know is the reference in subsection C is to a 6-year statute of limitations.
We're gonna have the sergeant at arms and the new chief of police come in. So, chief of the Capitol Police. For a security briefing, welcome to Agatha Kessler and John Holloway, new chief of the Capitol Police Department, and Agatha is our new sergeant nurse. You may need no introduction here, she's been around for many years, was an assistant, able, right next door. You could hear her. Agatha, why don't you join us?
Great. And I was hoping that Chief Foley could join me as well.
Yeah,
We'll do
well,
like a little
that's
joint
fine with me, yeah.
presentation, if that works.
Yeah, should I keep the, live stream going?
I think we should, because it's an actual meeting of the committee.
Sorry. Well, thank you, Senator Sears. Agatha Kessler, for the record, Sergeant at Arms, and we have a quick introduction prepared for you to introduce Chief Foley and just give a brief update on the transition and how it's going, if that works for you.
Maybe it would work better if we introduced ourselves to the chief.
We were going to ask for that, yes.
I'm Dick Sears. I represent Bennington County, which I don't know if you're familiar with Vermont, but we're down the southwest corner of Vermont, next to New York and Massachusetts. So we welcome you to the Capitol Police Department. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nader Hashim from the southeast corner, Wyndham County, and welcome to the Capitol.
This is on the New Hampshire map.
Hi, Bob North, Franklin County. We are bordered on the north by Canada and on the west by Lake Champlain in the northwest corner of Vermont.
Tanya Becomes Care represents Chittenden Central, which is our 3 most densely populated towns in Vermont.
And Senator Baruch is not here right now. He's the pro tem and also as represents Chittenden County.
We represent the same
Oh,
district.
same district, okay.
So just very quickly, because I know we only have a few minutes, John Foley comes from a long background of law enforcement in New York, and recruiting for the Capitol Police Chief was a top priority for the interim director, Kevin Williams. And I think some of you had an opportunity to meet Kevin. Kevin's last day was actually on Friday. He flew home on Saturday. And a big part of his responsibility was to recruit a new police chief. So you remember Matt Romei, Chief Romei, then Kevin Williams spans the gap as the interim director, and now we're very fortunate to have John as a chief. He started 2 weeks ago. So John was the chief of police for Larchmont, New York for 13 years. And as I understand it, because I've heard Kevin give his introduction a couple times now, that's very unusual for a police chief to spend 13 years in that position. I'm assuming it's kind of a burnout position. 4 or 5 years is more likely, but John was in that department for over 20 years.
27 and a half years.
27 and a half years with the same community. And that word community is really important. I think, especially in law enforcement, it's very important here in this building because the community in this building is very unique. And I think most communities would describe themselves as unique, but the State House certainly is unique in terms of the community members. There's the legislators, there's staff, there are people who come and testify on a very regular basis, like your commissioners and your secretaries that are in here all the time testifying. And then there's members of the public that are coming in maybe once to come and testify and they'll never be in again. And that is the community that we're serving here. So finding a police chief that recognizes community and can bring those values was very important. And the panel found those values in John. So I'll turn over to you now, John, to talk a little bit more about your background and some of your initial observations your first few weeks on the job.
Thank you so much. As I got stated, I'm John Foley, and thank you for the opportunity to address all of you and speak to you briefly. I will be succinct in my comments. I'll try to leave a minute or two for some questions if you do have any. So just briefly about myself in terms of my domestic life. I'm married 28 years. I have 3 children. My son Luke is 24. My daughter Abigail is 22. And my youngest son, John, is 18. At an early age, I aspired to enter into law enforcement, as my dad was a Marine Corps veteran and a 30-year member of the New York City Police Department. And my parents instilled in us the notion to have service above self, to continue to be part of the solution and to serve our communities. So I thought law enforcement was a wonderful vehicle for that. Upon graduating from high school, I attended Long Island University, where I attained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I then entered the New York City Police Academy, and I spent a couple of years in the NYPD. in community policing initiatives before becoming a patrol officer on the midnights on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I was fortunate enough to then go to the village of Larchmont, where I served for approximately 27 and a half years. I served in many different capacities. I was a police officer, I was a detective and a youth officer, I was a sergeant, I was a detective lieutenant, and then ultimately chief of police, and I served over 13 years in that capacity. As chief, I was the emergency response coordinator for my village, so I was responsible for all emergency services responses to natural and man-made disasters. And I learned quickly the value of networking in terms of forming relationships with external partners. We were 28 sworn personnel in my department, and in that part of New York, that's considered a small job. And in a true emergency, our resources were expended quickly. So we needed our other partners, other towns and villages, certainly the county police, state police, and on occasion, federal authorities. So it was important to engage them in a meaningful way to make sure they were there to support us when we needed them. Policing, I believe, is the most difficult profession, or one of them, certainly in the country. And the reason I observe that is because there are changing dynamics to it constantly. So there are legislative considerations that dictate how we can use force, how our operations are created, things that we can and can't do. There are societal expectations that continue to change, and technology, as it advances at an unprecedented rate, we're forced to contend with that. So these are reasons why I feel it's a difficult profession, and we need educated, professional, and dedicated individuals to join, and once we get them, to retain them. But to that end, I always sought to train myself throughout my entire career and educate myself. So in 2005, I returned back to school. I went to Marist College in New York, and I attained a master's degree in public administration. And that was certainly invaluable because as I became chief, my tasks were more administrative in nature. So it taught me a lot about budgeting, personnel, leadership, all these different aspects of administration. In 2016, I was fortunate enough to be selected to attend the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. And for those who are unaware of the program, they take senior law enforcement executives throughout the country, and they bring them back to the FBI Academy for a 10-week intensive course of study. Quantico is a big Marine Corps base. It houses not only the FBI Academy, but the DEA Academy and other federal authorities. My class 265 consisted of 48 states represented and approximately 15 to 16 countries. Our academic course of study was essentially police and social sciences and counterterrorism. And I learned a great many things while at the academy, certainly one of the highlights of my career. And I've taken those, the lessons that I felt were most important, taking care of our personnel, using best standards, networking, continuing to expand that base of people, and applied it certainly personally, but professionally. I plan to do that here at the Capitol Police Department. Just to give you a brief overview, we've promoted 2 sergeants now, Sergeant Truhan and Sergeant Sarah. You probably know them as Chris and Sarah, and they serve this community very well. They will be part of the building blocks of the future of this department. We're in the process of now doing background investigations into several individuals, and we need to backfill open positions. And as I expressed to them, we need to raise our standards, professionalize ourselves, increase our training. And then when we bring new people in, the only reality that they will know will be the one that we present to them. So that will be our goals in terms of the department. Just to give you a brief synopsis of my impressions in first coming to the Capitol building, the first hour I was here, Monday the 18th was my first day. Kevin Williams and Janet Miller brought me around the Capitol building, and we went through every room and looked at really everything. So my first impression was one of concern. I think this is a very porous environment in terms of safety and security. And I think we need to address that incrementally, but immediately moving forward. When we look at, there is no formal screening process whatsoever. I understand this is the people's house, and I have a great deal of respect for that. I'm a history enthusiast. So to me, to be able to see people access their legislators, to be able to come into the physical structure of the Capitol is a wonderful thing, and it's a very pure form of our government. But it denies the realities that exist in 2024, and I think it becomes, it's not well advised to continue to do that. So I think we need to start incrementally making changes to our screening process. Sergeant Truhan is currently calling every state house in the country to see what their kind of policies and procedures are and their screening processes. So I can't go from zero. There is some, there are individuals as elected officials who do not share my sentiment in terms of security. They have already expressed those opinions and that we shouldn't advance security measures or screening processes, but I believe if we do it in a smart way and incrementally, that we can really change people's opinions about that. I think first we need to direct movement in terms of how people are coming into the building, elected officials and otherwise, observe human behavior and then be able to build on it. Ultimately, I think we need a magnetometer. One of the individuals I met who works part-time in our Capitol Police Department, he's in the Judiciary, just across the lawn, and he runs the entire magnetometer program for every courthouse in Vermont. And he's a wonderful resource, and I've talked to him about measures that we could take moving forward. So that's just a brief synopsis of who I am in terms of my educational and professional experience and my first observations coming into the Capitol. I look forward to working with everybody and serving this community in a meaningful way. It's a unique opportunity to really advance what everyone is doing here. And the very last thing I will say is I believe public safety is an institutional responsibility. So that means each and every one of us has a part. We have a finite number of resources in the Capitol Police Department. So it will be my approach to educate people and to give classes on things that we can do to keep each other safe in terms of evacuations for fire drills or active shooters or medical emergencies. All of these things are absolutely capable of happening or occurring here. And I need to teach everybody how to respond appropriately.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you, sir.
And, I know the issue of screening or whatever you use is one that we've confronted in the past, particularly when we have controversial issues that we're dealing with. It worries me. But on the other hand, I think it's kind of unfair that every time the governor gives one of his addresses, which is his State of the Union, or State of the State, and the budget address, we get all screened. We have law enforcement all over the building. And then when us lowly legislators are working and toiling in here, and our staff is working and toiling in here, we got nothing. We've got you guys, but there's no screening. Anybody could come into this building with any kind of weapon. My biggest concern is actually some of the people who write us on a regular basis and get to a threatening point. And I've always turned those over to the chief of police or the Sergeant Barnes, because normally they're able to track down the IP address and find out who it is we're actually dealing with and whether or not we should be worried or not. And that's one thing I would really suggest and strongly emphasize that legislators should, or staff should, contact any threatening emails. We don't get calls anymore like we used to, although I did get one today. But welcome, and I'm a big believer in at least having the ability. I can remember there was a woman who we knew had severe emotional problem. This is about 10 years ago. She would come into this committee and we were dealing with certain bills, and she was angry about the judicial system and what it had done. And one day she came in with a hand in a box. And I had no idea what was in that box. And so this is long enough ago where we only had a couple of police officers in the building. And when I asked them to please check on the box, I got little response. So I was frustrated with that level of response because she could have had a pistol in the box easily and shot up the entire committee. She was that angry about the judicial system. So I'm hoping that's just a few of the things that have happened in my time. I've been here 30 years. When I first started here, we had one officer. His name was Ray, and he was a great guy. We've grown, and you have two members of this committee with history in law enforcement, by the way. Senator Norris was a sheriff for a number of years, maybe, I don't remember.
20 years as sheriff in law enforcement for over 30 years, yes.
And Senator Hashim was a state trooper.
Excellent. Not nearly as long as Senator Norris's experience, but 7.5 years.
Okay, that's great. Thank you both for your service, and your comments are well received, and we are going to try to be as responsive as we can be. Threats on a local and state level are actually increasing nationwide. The federal elected officials, always are subject to that, but it's increasing on the lower level. And I urge anybody that receives a threat, or even if they're unsure if it's a threat, it could be protected free speech, but let us make that determination. We'd rather have the information and the ability to investigate it or refer a certain individual somewhere, to see if we can come to a successful conclusion and decide if it is a true threat. We're in the process of trying to revamp our reporting system as it pertains to threats, so that we have more information when we are receiving those types of complaints. So,
John and Agatha, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much.
I'll invite you back anytime you want to update us on what's happening and what threats or whatever you might be seeing in the State House.
Of course. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and if there's any way I can serve all of you or my department, please just let me know.
Larchmont is just outside of you, or is it further up?
So it's Westchester County, the first county coming out of New York City.
Yeah.
It's about 9 miles from the Bronx. Boston Post Road runs through it.
Yeah,
I've right on the Long
through
Island
it
side.
on the at times. I've seen the signs for Larchmont down in New York City and on the way back or down. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Agatha.